At 73, Ben Crenshaw finally names 5 golf players he hated. The man they called Gentle Ben, the Southern gentleman who cried at Augusta and built golf courses like poetry, just revealed a dark list that shocked everyone. This is the same guy known for kindness and grace, yet he admitted to hating 5 specific players throughout his entire career. Why would someone so respectful harbor such deep professional animosity? Ben Crenshaw spent decades being the nicest guy in golf. He won 2 Masters championships, became one of the greatest putters ever, and earned respect from everyone. His mentor Harvey Penick taught him that golf was an art form, something beautiful that required touch and creativity. Crenshaw believed in smooth strokes, emotional connection, and respecting the land when designing courses. His 1995 Masters victory showed his artistry perfectly. He did not have a single 3-putt that entire tournament. That kind of control came from feel, from understanding the greens like a painter understands canvas. But this artistic approach also made him judge other players harshly. Anyone who valued winning over beauty, anyone who treated golf like a business instead of an art, bothered him deeply, and 5 players bothered him more than anyone else. The era Crenshaw played in changed everything about golf. The 1970s through the 1990s saw legends competing after Jack Nicklaus dominated for so long. Tom Watson, Tom Kite, Bernhard Langer, and Fred Couples all fought for championships. Winning majors became incredibly difficult because so many great players competed at once. But something else happened during these decades. Golf started shifting from artistry to power. Players stopped caring about elegant shot making and started caring about hitting the ball farther than anyone else. The finesse that Crenshaw mastered suddenly seemed old-fashioned. New players brought aggression, scientific precision, and raw distance. He later said the evolution he observed in tour golfers was unfathomable. The changes went beyond just technique. The entire philosophy of competition shifted. Golf became about dominating opponents, not dancing with the course. It became about celebrity and money, not quiet contemplation. For Crenshaw, this transformation felt like watching a cherished friend change into a stranger. The traditions he held dear were being trampled by players who seemed to care more about endorsement deals than respecting the history of the game. And the 5 players on his hate list represented everything wrong with this new direction. The first player Crenshaw hated was Seve Ballesteros. This one hurt because Crenshaw actually admired Seve's talent. He thought Seve had beautiful natural ability and flawless hands on the club. Spectators loved watching him play because his skills were undeniable. But Seve had a reputation that ruined everything. American players called him the king of gamesmanship. He manipulated rules, constantly questioned decisions, and used psychological pressure to rattle opponents. The Ryder Cup brought out the worst in these tactics. Europeans led by Sev challenged American teams with calculated mind games. In 1989, Seve had a famous dispute with Paul Ozinger over a ball drop. He questioned everything, pressured officials, and made his methodical opponents uncomfortable. This approach destroyed what Crenshaw believed golf should be. The game required self-regulation and mutual trust. Players policed themselves because honor mattered more than winning. But Sev introduced cynical ambiguity. He stretched rules until they bent, forcing Americans to doubt whether the competition was even fair. Crenshaw captained the 1999 Ryder Cup team that pulled off a miraculous comeback. He understood how important trust was in competition. Having to question your opponent's integrity added psychological pressure beyond what the course demanded. For someone who believed in golf's purity, Sev's gamesmanship felt like pollution. It threatened the honesty that made the sport noble. The tension became unbearable during team competitions when national pride mixed with questionable tactics. Crenshaw felt betrayed watching a player with such God-given talent resort to manipulating the system. Crenshaw respected Sev's genius but hated his methods. That internal conflict made the rivalry even more painful. Before we continue with the rest of Crenshaw's list, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below telling us which of these rivalries shocked you the most. Now let's talk about the second player Crenshaw despised. Greg Norman represented everything loud and commercial about modern golf. They called him the Shark, and he brought swagger nobody had seen before. Norman was one of the finest drivers in history, prioritizing aggressive strategy and overwhelming distance. He became a global celebrity, dominating the world rankings and winning 88 tournaments worldwide. But here's the problem. Despite all that hype, Norman only won 2 major championships. The gap between his massive reputation and his actual major performance created endless debates. People argued whether he truly delivered on his potential. All that noise around his career drove Crenshaw crazy. Norman symbolized the shift from finesse to power that threatened everything Crenshaw stood for. Crenshaw's success came from masterful putting and strategic precision. Norman's game demanded hitting the ball farther and harder, making delicate short game skills less relevant. The philosophical breach was obvious. Crenshaw valued poetry. Norman valued dominance. Every time Norman stepped up and crushed a drive 300 yards, it felt like another nail in the coffin of traditional golf. The game Crenshaw loved was being bulldozed by raw athleticism. Crenshaw later admitted it was not personal, but he could not stand how much noise followed Norman. The Australian attracted a massive media circus that prioritized raw force and celebrity status over thoughtful course management. Crenshaw devoted himself to golf course architecture and quiet discipline. He studied how courses flowed naturally and how strategy unfolded hole by hole. Norman's spectacle felt like a vulgar intrusion on that meditative struggle. Commercialism and power threatened to eclipse the intellectual challenge Crenshaw cherished. Norman's style was the antithesis of classical ideals. His overwhelming distance and celebrity stage made golf about showmanship instead of artistry. The worst part for Crenshaw was watching crowds flock to Norman's aggressive style, while ignoring the subtle brilliance of traditional shot making. It felt like watching people prefer explosions over symphonies. Norman made golf about personality and power, turning what should have been intimate competition into a spectator sport that valued entertainment over excellence. Crenshaw rejected Norman not because of technical incompetence, but because the Shark represented a future where power and fame mattered more than subtle strategy. That rejection was about protecting what Crenshaw believed golf should be. The third player on the list might surprise people. Nick Faldo pursued something he called control, and he made it his ultimate goal. Faldo famously rebuilt his entire swing, methodically stripping away variables until his game became perfected technical science. This systematic approach earned him a reputation for being cold, detached, and robotic. He never mixed with other golfers during his playing days because he did not want to talk golf all night. Faldo preferred separation and internal focus. That purely pragmatic, results-driven mentality opposed everything about Crenshaw's warm relational style. Crenshaw believed golf needed a human emotional dimension. Faldo eliminated emotion entirely. The most painful moment came at the 1989 Masters. Crenshaw entered the final round, leading Faldo by 5 shots. That should have been dominant. But Faldo's relentless scientific discipline prevailed, forcing a playoff that the Englishman won. That victory proved the cold, systematic approach could crush emotional, feel-based games. Crenshaw mastered putting touch and creative intuition. He hated Faldo's system because it sought to eliminate human vulnerability, improvisation, and expressive risk. Faldo's technical perfection stripped golf of its emotional poetry. This represented artistic fear of obsolescence. Faldo showed that technology, biomechanics, and relentless practice could minimize dependence on feel. The finesse-based game rooted in Harvey Pennick's teachings suddenly seemed vulnerable against this emotionless machine. Crenshaw's rejection of Faldo was visceral. He saw professional golf heading toward a place where technical prowess rendered artistic genius secondary to systematic efficiency. Faldo's robotic perfection worked, and that terrified Crenshaw. Watching his beautiful game reduced to repeatable mechanics felt like watching art die. What made it worse was that Faldo's approach represented the future. Young players started copying his methodical style, turning golf into a science experiment rather than an art form. Crenshaw saw his entire philosophy becoming obsolete in real time. Raymond Floyd was the fourth player Crenshaw could not stand. Floyd appeared as a fierce contemporary, even tying Crenshaw at the 1974 Masters. People recognized Floyd as one of the era's most intense competitors. He had an icy demeanor, an intimidating presence, and a temperament focused on winning through psychological attrition. Floyd's professional persona involved emotional suppression. He maintained a stony poker-like exterior designed to give opponents nothing. This contrasted sharply with Crenshaw's open, visible emotional investment. Crenshaw wore his feelings on his sleeve. Floyd turned himself into stone. The specific frustration centered on Floyd's intimidation tactics. People called him a master of discomfort. Floyd utilized his intense gaze and silent, relentless presence to unsettle opponents. He maximized competitive tension in team events and key matchups. For someone as sensitive and emotionally invested as Crenshaw, this psychological pressure was devastatingly effective. Floyd's primary tactic targeted the emotional calm required for finesse games. He wanted to induce mental errors through calculated deployment of weaponized temperament. The antipathy came from facing an opponent whose victory method was not just technical mastery, but breaking your spirit. This was different from the other conflicts. Floyd was not accused of cheating or rule manipulation. The tension came from methodology. Floyd's calculated discomfort tactics transformed competition into a hostile environment. He eroded the shared experience of the game. Crenshaw prioritized courtesy even during intense battles. He resented that Floyd turned victory pursuit into a personalized psychological trial designed to break opponents rather than simply outplay their technique. Golf should have been about conquering the course together. Floyd made it about conquering each other. Playing against Floyd felt like walking into a freezer where warmth and camaraderie died instantly. The fifth and final player on Crenshaw's hate list was John Daly. Daly's emergence in the early 1990s represented cultural detonation in professional golf. They called him the Wild Thing, and he personified competitive anarchy. Daly relied on raw, aggressive power and showed profound disregard for discipline and decorum. His dramatic behavior included notorious blow-ups like the 6-putt on the 18th hole at Muirfield Village. That kind of meltdown defied the precision and control defining professional golf. For traditionalists like Crenshaw, Daly was a terrifying symptom of golf's societal collapse. His wild behavior and lack of discipline directly threatened the foundations Crenshaw respected: golf, was built on self-discipline, quiet contemplation, and reverence for the course. Daly represented total repudiation of those values. His approach was antithetical to the Penick principles Crenshaw lived by. Daly prioritized impulse and power over methodical preparation and refined execution. Watching Daly grip and rip without consequence made Crenshaw question whether discipline even mattered anymore. The chaos seemed rewarded rather than punished. Crenshaw initially hated the chaos Daly brought. The structural violation of golf's ethical and cultural norms drove traditionalists to distraction. But here is where the story takes an interesting turn. Mature Crenshaw eventually evolved past personal offense. He achieved historical acceptance of Daly's role in golf's survival. While Crenshaw initially despised the chaos, he came to understand Daly's unintentional service to the sport. Even contemporaries recognized Daly as a novelty, but that novelty captivated massive audiences outside golf's traditional exclusive demographic. Daly injected raw theatrical personality and relatable vulnerability. He made golf exciting and relevant to people who found the sterile precision of Faldo or the politeness of Crenshaw too inaccessible. This evolution showed something important about Crenshaw. His mission of classical preservation had to balance against popular relevance. Daly demonstrated that golf needed to break its own strict cultural rules to survive and attract new generations. Crenshaw's initial rejection transformed into complex respect. He recognized that Daly, despite chaotic methods, played a crucial role guaranteeing golf's popular future. This was conflict between preservation and popularity. The traditionalists conceded that spectacle was necessary for art's survival. Looking at all five players together reveals something profound. Seve Ballesteros challenged golf's moral foundation through gamesmanship. Greg Norman challenged strategic necessity of finesse through overwhelming power and spectacle. Nick Faldo challenged technical necessity of emotion through scientific control. Raymond Floyd challenged psychological environment through calculated intimidation. John Daly challenged cultural decorum through anarchy and chaos. Each player represented an evolution of professional golf away from artistry toward various forms of pragmatic, emotional, or chaotic efficiency. Crenshaw measured rivals not just by scores, but by integrity and style of their competitive approach. These five antagonists collectively defined limits Crenshaw refused to cross. They threatened everything he held sacred about the game. His ability to articulate precise philosophical flaws in these competitive styles confirmed his role as historian and steward of golf. The professional antipathies are as significant to his legacy as his two green jackets. They represent enduring tension between classical artistry and relentless pursuit of competitive victory in the modern era. What makes this revelation so powerful is timing. At 73, Crenshaw finally felt free to speak openly about feelings he carried for decades. The weight of maintaining his gentleman reputation prevented honest discussion during his competitive years. Now, with distance and perspective, he could finally name the players who represented threats to everything he loved about golf. But here is what makes Crenshaw's story ultimately inspiring. His nuanced view, particularly his eventual acceptance of Daly's cultural necessity, reveals a figure who understood evolution. Though deeply traditional, Crenshaw grasped that games must sometimes sacrifice purity for progress. His confession about hating these five players was not about personal spite. It was a profound statement regarding philosophical and aesthetic boundaries of competitive golf. Crenshaw, the custodian of golf's artistic soul, showed us that passion for tradition can coexist with understanding change. His hate was really love for the game expressed through protective instinct. He wanted to preserve what made golf beautiful, even as the sport evolved around him. The five players he hated forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about golf's future. They showed him that survival sometimes requires compromise with principles. That realization came painfully, but ultimately made Crenshaw wiser. His willingness to eventually accept players like Daly proved he valued golf's longevity over his personal preferences. Make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments whether you think Crenshaw was right to criticize these players, or if golf needed their different approaches to survive. Ben Crenshaw's legacy stands as testament to the power of artistic integrity. His confessions reveal a man who cared so deeply about golf's purity that he could not help but speak truth about what threatened it. That kind of passion deserves respect even when we disagree with his conclusions.